Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Samso. Today we've got Chris Davies here talking about something really more scientific than what we normally do on Coffee with Samso. But I'll intro you, Chris. Maybe just give us a rundown of who you are, what you've done, and go from there.
Okay, Noel, thank you very much for inviting me here this morning. I suppose with my background, I've been in the mining industry too long. I graduated in 1970, so that makes 50 years. But I'm probably the only person you'll meet who's started up 3 mines. I started the Bounty Gold Mine. I was part of the team on the Golden Grove startup. And I started up the Paulsons Mine. But in addition, I re-entered and reopened the Riverina Historic Underground Gold Mine. But I've been the deputy quarry manager at comprise. So I've done a lot of mining on mine sites, but particularly underground mine sites in West Australia. So the health of underground miners is of some interest to me. I was on the Mining Industry Advisory Committee for the state government between 2012 and 2018. And while I was on that, the ex-director of the WA School of Mines, Odwin Jones, sent me an email. And when I read it, I was concerned with what I read because it was about something invisible which I'd never realized was there, which is nano diesel particulates. In the air that we're sitting in right now, because we're sitting near a fairly busy Mill Point Road, we're breathing in probably between 6,000 and 10,000 of these nanoparticles per cubic centimeter of our breath. Now there are 4 cubic centimeters. If you look at a sugar cube, a sugar lump, that's 4 cc's. So that isn't very much. But when every diesel engine in the world actually generates and emits 100 million of these nano diesel particulates per cc, so in a sugar lump, there would be 400 million. It's a major accomplishment of micro technology. Now these particles are so small, they are the finest wool you can get is the pashmina wool from up between China and India, near Afghanistan, and that's 8 micron. What I'm talking about is a 15th the size of that. Oh, no, sorry, no, hang on. 28, 160 times finer than that. This is so invisible, it never settles. And we breathe it in all the time. Now, there are, the size we're talking about is 50 to 70 nanometers. At the moment, everyone's talking about the coronavirus. And this is a finer particle than those particles, than the COVID-19. And that can be breathed in, this can be breathed in. The problem with the nano diesel particulates, they are so fine, your lungs aren't designed for them because your lungs weren't designed for diesel. They're involved to breathe oxygen in and to absorb oxygen and to have carbon dioxide come out. The nanoparticle is finer than that. So while some get stuck in the alveoli in your lungs, a lot of the particles go straight through into the bloodstream. The important issue is here the Trojan horse effect. Some of Noel, you've probably seen people when they're spray painting cars or something, they wear a gas mask with big canisters on the side. those canisters contain activated carbon, which means that any alcohol or gases that you try to inhale actually attach themselves to the carbon, to the activated carbon in the mask. Nanodiesel particulates are activated carbon. Now, when the diesel engine burns diesel, in the exhaust fumes, there's still unburnt diesel. There's things like formaldehyde, there's sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, acetone, all sorts of things. And as they come out in the exhaust gases, they can do two things. Some of them attach to the outside of the nanoparticles as individual molecules, and so they hitch a ride. A lot of the other gases will actually condense, they cool. As soon as they come out of the engine, they start cooling, and as they cool, they condense, they reach their dew point and they drop out. But the nanodiesel particulates don't drop out. They waft on with a little thin coating of formaldehyde, sulfur dioxide, and though they then are taken into the lungs, they go through the lungs into the bloodstream. And once they get into the bloodstream, they go throughout your body. And I've got slides showing how they can get into all the tissue in your body. Researchers have proved that, for example, they go into your bloodstream, and your kidneys are alerted to the fact they don't like these, so they pull them out and put them into your urine. And it's been shown that in places where you have high concentrations of diesel fumes, such as, in my experience, underground, you get a higher incidence of bladder cancer, because it goes into your urine. Unless you pee every 10 minutes, it's sitting in your bladder, and these particles then are touching the bladder wall, bladder cancer. There was a study done in West Australia in 2017 at the Sunrise Dam underground mine. The results were reported in May this year, and they showed three interesting things, two interesting, the third one worrying. The occurrence of having all those chemicals introduced into your blood supply and your tissue meant that even over one shift, the blood pressure of the underground miners went up, and their breathing, their respiratory function went down. But the worst one was over that one shift. Now, we all have DNA. We are made of DNA. And in your DNA, you have genes. Now, your genes do special, individual, specific things. But it has been proven by the Sunrise study that some of the genes have been methylated. Their behavior has been switched. And it was proven that 29 genes that actually do things their behavior had been changed.
So you're talking about alterate the nanoparticles, creating a situation where it changes your gene structure.
The genes, their behavior has changed. And what that means is some of them are to do with things like Parkinson's disease. But they have effects throughout your body. And there's been very little research done onto the behavior of your genes interacting with the chemicals brought in by the nanodiesel particulates. But we do know that there's been a lot of work done in Europe, particularly at the University of Bern, and they say that if you breathe a lot of nanodiesel particulates, for example, if you live, for example, in Perth, there are apartments right next to the Kwinana Freeway, just below Parliament. There's that tunnel, isn't there, between with the bridge going across between the St George's Terrace and Parliament there. Those people are breathing in the order of 60,000. Now, here, as I said, on Mill Point Road, probably about 10,000. If you have a backyard, it might be 2 or 3,000, but it'll be 2 or 3,000. They're inhaling, they're living in 50 to 60,000.
You're talking about the underground miners?
No, I'm talking about
the apartments.
The apartments. The apartments next to the Kwinana Freeway. Down at the Como, there's the Como pedestrian overpass bridge. There's apartments right there next to the Kwinana Freeway. I've measured continually levels of 40 to 70,000. So these aren't people walking through a shopping centre car park or down St George's Terrace once or twice. This is people who are living. They're living in high levels. Now, it isn't going to kill them. It isn't like being run over by a car. It isn't like being hit over the head with a brick. But this is going to reduce their life health outcomes. They will get, statistically, more of them will get respiratory diseases, heart diseases. There'll be more of them who will have dementia and Parkinson's disease. They will be more prone to all degradation of their health. It isn't, and people say to me, well, how many people have died of it? Well, there's only one proven case which was was taken to the High Court in Canada. Unfortunately, the bloke died before to settlement, so his widow got the money, but the High Court agreed that his death had been accelerated by his inhalation of diesels, and he was a fitter in a mechanic in an underground diesel mine.
Chris, before we head off, continue on, we need to order coffee, because the last time I didn't have coffee, they said it was fake news.
Right, okay. Could I have a hot chocolate extra hot, please?
Yeah. So I thought, hang on, we didn't do the coffee before we started.
That's a good idea.
They'll just say it's all fake news again.
Yes, absolutely. Well, no, but it's in a library, so and I've just been seeing some books that my grandkids would probably like. But of course, with the with the COVID-19, it's interesting that people are becoming aware of what they're breathing. The crazy thing is that I'd say 99% of the masks are being wasted because you don't need the mask for what you're breathing in. It's the people who have the virus
breathing out. Yeah.
Breathing out. That's what it's there for. Yeah. That's what it's there for.
Speaking of masks, like I remember when I was a jewelry, I used to, you had to have a mask next to jewelry because you got the silicosis issues.
Totally useless.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, yeah.
They are totally useless because unless you have that sort of mask that I was describing, the terrible rubber thing which gets really hot, that's the only one that ensures that everything you breathe in and out, or that you breathe in, goes through the mask, it goes through the filter. Okay. And so there are surgical masks, but they are really not very effective for, in the long term, if you're working underground or something. So the way that we have looked at the underground mines, and it's also the surface, interestingly enough, the starting point for improving in a big way, while Europe and North America have been talking about this for years, this is what's weird, that it started when the Swiss were tunneling under the Alps. They're putting lots of tunnels through back in the 90s, and they suddenly realized that they were walking around in all these diesel fumes, and they thought this can't be very good. So they started an annual conference. That conference has been going for 25 or 26 years now. So since about the middle 90s now, about 25 years. North America has one. So they've been going for a long time. And so the Europeans and North Americans are sort of becoming used to it, but it's the people who have taken this really by the throat are the Israelis. There is a researcher there called Tartakovsky the Israeli bus companies were going to bring in new buses, and they assured everyone they were much cleaner. But when the engine manufacturers tell you that the new engines are cleaner, they mean there's less visible soot. But what is really anachronistic, in them being cleaner with less visible soot, they actually emit more nanodiesel particulates than the old engines, significantly more. So this bloke, Tartakovsky, wrote up a learned research paper, and he gave it to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And the Knesset took one look at this and said, from now on, every diesel engine coming into Israel has to have a nanodiesel particulate filter, because they're readily available. And then the Israeli railways came along very soon after and said, it doesn't apply to us, does it? And of course the Knesset are a fairly unyielding bunch of lawmakers. They said, of course it does. So instead of on a truck which might be 400 kilowatt, suddenly you had trains with 4 megawatt, 10 times as big. So they started putting nanodiesel particulate filters on trains. And then the Europeans realized it. So in Europe, they're putting nanodiesel particulate filters even on trains. Now, in Australia, we don't have, on light vehicles, on diesel light vehicles, you may have heard about the Toyota have got a class action about the nano filters they've got on some of their vehicles because they're plugging up. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to do the right thing, and other companies are trying to do the right thing. But on large equipment, such as on-highway trucks, there is no diesel filtration. But underground, in the hard rock, there are 59 underground hard rock mines in WA. About 9,000 underground workers. And what I'm doing, I hope, I intend, will improve the health and the life outcomes of every underground hard rock miner in WA, and that will have a cascade effect throughout Australia and the world.
Because one of the things, I mean, when we had this discussion when I first met you, when you're talking about outside driving a diesel car, and you're talking about these particles are so small, it actually almost floats in the air and stays in suspension longer. Yep. I'm assuming that would be the case.
They
right?
never settle.
They never settle.
Some of it, well, did you do physics at high school?
No.
Okay, well, if you do science at high school, you're taught about Brownian motion. Mm. And this is where the particles are so small, they never stop. They don't obey gravity, they just hop and bop around.
So if that was the case, then you would expect that in an underground scenario, because on my first time in the underground, I was so surprised that everything is literally covered in soot, right? And no matter what you touch, you end up having a black experience, right?
Yes.
And so this is going on for
however
years.
Bad it is out in the open air, underground, it's 10 times worse. And so what is happening now? Noel, everyone who buys anything knows that the salesman may not sell you the best there is, he'll sell you the best he has to sell you. So if a company is selling equipment and you say you want a filter on it, they'll put the best they have available to them. It may not be the best in the marketplace. And it is a fact in the underground hard rock mining industry that to date, the filters that manufacturers have been putting on purportedly to stop nanodiesel particulates have not been very good, because I mentioned first of all that every diesel engine emits 100 million. Now you know the Dettol ad that says gets rid of 99.9% of all known germs. That still leaves a whole lot of germs that they don't get rid of. Well, there was a nano DPM filter company that said we get rid of 99%. So of 100 million, they were almost admitting that our filters will still emit 1 million per cc, which is an awful lot. And we've recorded those results with their filters, and yes, their filters say that after filtration, they're emitting 1 million or 1.2 million. But for exactly the same price, if the companies looked around, there is another company, very good company, and on the same piece of equipment that was reading 1.2 million, if you take one manufacturer's filter off and put the new one on, it gets 12,000. So it's 100 times. So from 1.2 million, it's 100 times better. So it isn't 99%, it's 99.99%, which is fantastic because it brings it down to about 12,000, which is a bit like
12,000 cc.
No, 12,000 per cubic centimeter.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like Mill Point Road now. Now that's the simple one, but there are two main underground equipment suppliers, and one of them is right now will put a good nano diesel particulate filter on its equipment if the client asks for it, and they will produce air which has less than 1,000. Your sitting room at home probably isn't 1,000. So what I'm saying, in winter, if you want to warm your house, you should get one of their pieces of underground equipment, back it up to the French doors and blow their exhaust in, because it's cleaner than the air in your house. And that means that, and this is what's so sad, the solutions are available, but the companies have been very, very complacent, and it's the old adage of she'll be right. Now I remember when I first went underground, I'd be walking down a wet, damp, cold drive underground, and I'd come around the corner and I'd be embraced by the warm arms of diesel fumes. And you remember as well. And they're actually quite comforting.
Yeah.
You know, but then I'd say...
And you would stand next to it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. You're standing next to the diesel engine, no big deal. And you think, can't be too bad, because otherwise they wouldn't let us be down in this stuff.
I never thought that. It was just nice and warm.
It's nice and warm. And this is but what we didn't realize is how little they knew. They knew as little as we did. And this is what is so sad, that what has happened in the last 30 years, there's been big advantages in the knowledge, but the companies who should be taking the lead on this aren't bothering. Part of that is because the underground miners, particularly on FIFO, they drink too much, they smoke too much, they eat too much. So they've got much more acute health issues than Nano diesel is the thing that will affect when they die. It'll shorten their life. But what they're doing, their lifestyle, is going to shorten their life much more acutely. Thank you. There we go. Oh, that's a very pretty looking...
It's no longer fake news. It's all true news from now on.
Coffee. Chocolate. But so it's really up to the companies have got to, and over the last 2 years, some of the companies, and it's interesting, a lot of the things in West Australia, we have two major underground mining contractors. One gets it, one doesn't get it. There are two main filter providers. One gets it, one doesn't get it. There are two main underground equipment suppliers. One gets it, the other one wants to get it, but is having problems with its engines. So it's up to the companies, it's up to the client. And there was an interesting, some of the companies use a motto. They say, we want everything to be BAT, best available technology. But they don't bother looking and researching deeply into their technology to find out what is the best. So they go to their equipment supplier because they've got 10 of their trucks already. They want to buy another 3. They go to them and say, give us 3 new trucks with the best filters you've got. They don't say, give us 3 new trucks with the best filters that are on the marketplace, because the manufacturers then got a hassle,
Doesn't fit.
oh God, no, that's difficult. And so then the customer doesn't. So I've been to a mine where the contractor and the company got into a slanging match, but you told us they were the best. No, they were the best that we could get. We didn't get the other ones. So now what's really sad is that you have to, if you want to manage it, you have to be able to monitor it. And there is a couple of devices. There's one you put up the exhaust pipe to measure this 100 million, or to measure the 1 million or whatever that comes out of the engine. And to my knowledge right now, there is only one of these devices in West Australia, and it hasn't been calibrated for some years, and it costs so much to send it away and get it recalibrated that the owner hasn't bothered because no one's asking him to use it.
Which leads to my sort of $10 million question. Like everything else, until someone says you have to do it, if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen. People tend not to do it. That's a good question. And that's what everyone always says. That's a really good question. They, notice when they're being interviewed, they always start off by saying, "That's a really good question." Well, in this case, I'm not answering it.
no, but in this case, yeah, exactly, and I'm not going to answer it. By God, no. In this case, the present Minister for Mines, Bill Johnson, gets it, and he's doing something about it, and he's bringing in regulations which mean that companies are going to have to understand the issues with diesel particulates, and they're going to have to count them. Now, to count them, you have to understand, first of all, because underground, what you breathe underground comes from 2 sources. One is for the exhaust, and the other is the ventilation. So you bring fresh air from surface to underground. So what you inhale is a mixture of exhaust plus ventilation. So what you have, because you have to understand what is in the exhaust, but you have to understand what the miner is breathing. And there is now the device to understand what the miner is breathing has been available for about 5 years. And that will cost about $15,000. And they can be bought. And a couple of companies have got them. Now there are 59 underground mines, and I know that less than 5 are actually counting the diesel particulates. The other 55 or 54 aren't, but they're going to have to. So they really need to get their act into gear now, because up until now you have a hierarchy of enforcement in the mining industry. You have an act, which is what Parliament passes. Then you have a regulation, which the minister passes. Then you have a guideline, a code of practice, which the mines department enforce. And then you have a guideline, which the mines department put out and say, could you do it, please? Until now, diesel particulates have been a guideline. They're going to be brought up to a regulation within enforcement through a code of practice. And people are going to have to start monitoring the count. And you can do that. It's a clever device, costs about $15,000 to $17,000. It takes a reading every second. And it's an amazing thing. It'll say that right now there are 55,000 per cc made with an average diameter of 50 or 72 or 45. And it gives a reading every second. So you can get an average reading for a minute or an hour, and you can have it attached to a miner, or you can just walk around with it. And I've walked around with it down St George's Terrace. I've taken it out to the airport, all over the place, and it's amazing the readings I get. out around the airport where there's a lot of kerosene burnt. I can get readings out there of over 100,000 particles per cc, but very fine, down the 20s, which is actually either kerosene vapor or kerosene particles. It's really interesting stuff.
I mean, this reminds me of the times when I was at a project where they were monitoring for fibers and things like that, and I got talking to these guys, and they monitor a lot of things like dust, or sorts of chemical-based dust and things like that. I'm a bit surprised that this hasn't been...
Surprised? I'm gratified by your... I mean, it is... the word you're looking for and clutching for is inexcusable. It's because, because the mining companies are worried about people falling off cliffs or getting hit by rocks. Those are acute things. They'll in the canteen on any mine site, they'll have these traffic lights of what you can eat lots of, salad, and they'll have next to the chips, they'll have a red light, don't have many. So they're interested in their diet. But some people don't eat very much, or they only eat lettuce. But everybody breathes air. So this is a common thing to everyone who goes underground, breathes air. And this is the most, because it's invisible, people don't bother. Now, there's been some interesting work done on it, particularly at the University of Edinburgh, where, as you know, Noel, students at university will do anything for a case of beer. Anything. And I've got a photograph of a student at the University of Edinburgh, didn't say what he was paid, but he's sitting in a 3-meter cube with a big window, reading a book. Looks pretty innocuous, until you see there's a silver pipe coming in the back of the cube, and that's connected to a diesel engine. So they're gassing him. But then in addition, they're adding a radioactive isotope called technetium, and every 10 minutes they take him out and give him a full body X-ray. And after 20 minutes it shows his entire body, from his ankles to his brain, has got nanoparticles in it. So it's penetrated all his tissue, but particularly his gonads, his lungs, his sinuses.
What year was this done?
This was done in 2017 or 2016. Yeah, I know. And a friend of mine saw this, and she immediately went off. She has a friend who is a professor of ethics, and he immediately went off to check where the University of Edinburgh have an ethics committee. He said, "How do you allow them to gas someone?"
That's just unbelievable.
I've got the photographs, and I've got papers. So they looked at the researcher who did it, and they started checking all his other papers to see. But it's only with this sort of. Now, you think that's interesting. When you're having surgery, just when you're in a weakened state, they come up to you and they say, "Noel, could you sign this waiver for us?" Which says, if you cark it, bad luck.
Yeah.
Well, they came up to him. These people were having open heart surgery. So they're in an especially weakened state. So they come up and they say, "No, do you sign the waiver? And by the way, we'd like to put some nano gold particles in your aorta, in the sidewall of your aorta." Now, this bloke just about to do open heart surgery, so you'll do anything you want, anything you want. Yeah, okay. So they put gold nanoparticles in the wall of people's major blood vessels. Why? Because gold doesn't react with anything until it comes up on an X-ray really easily. So 3 months and 6 months after the operation, they checked the tissue and they found the nanoparticles were still lodged in the tissue. And what this is starting to prove is that nanoparticles don't move, or may not move. And we've got the University of Bern has looked at what happens with nanoparticles. When they come into your bloodstream, they start going around. Now, red blood cells are 8 micron in size, the same as the hair from the Pashmina goats. So they're 160 times bigger than the nanodiesel particulates. So the nanodiesel particulate bumps into a red blood cell or any other cell in your body and can penetrate it. Now all the cells in your body are kept together by osmotic pressure, by the solution strength within the cell. That keeps the cell wall inflated. But when the nanoparticle comes in, the sulfur dioxide or acetone or nitrogen dioxide that's in there goes into solution, and it changes the strength of the solution in your cell. If only one nanoparticle gets in, that's fine. But if 30 get in, they change the osmotic pressure so much it bursts the cell. That's not good for you. And this is happening all the time.
Chris, probably not. I don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing we're talking about this during this event. I'm sorry to say this, but I'm not really interested in you. What I'm interested in is your children, because when we look at the effects on the miners, they're dying of overeating, smoking, drinking. What I'm really concerned about is their children. Because having seen this, what they call the methylation of the genes doing different things, what I'm worried about is what is it doing to their DNA that they're passing on to their children. And that's what concerns me, because other studies have shown that what happens to the parents can be passed on to the DNA to their children. There's lots of studies showing this, that if the DNA is altered, that DNA can then affect their children. And I'm concerned that that's what's happening, that's what will happen with the children of the underground miners. That makes sense? Yeah, no, perfect. I mean, Chris, it's a fantastic topic. When I first heard about it through a mutual friend of ours, I was instantly interested to have a chat with you, and we had that phone conversation. Here we are. But I want to thank you for your time. I think it's a fantastic topic.
An absolute pleasure, and I hope everyone keeps breathing, but just be aware of what you're breathing. Okay?
All right.
Thank you, Noel.
Thank you.
Thanks.